Welcome to FIU Insights, Florida International University's Facebook Live session. I'm David Kramer with the Green School of International and Public Affairs and want to welcome you to today's session where we're looking at the declaration of bankruptcy by the McClatchy newspaper chain. What does it mean for the future of democracy and what does it mean for the future of the media? The McClatchy Company, publisher of the Miami Herald and 28 other dailies across the country, has filed for bankruptcy, and while its newsrooms will continue operating, the reorganization is a sign of today's challenging news media environment. Scores of local newspapers have shut their doors around the country, leaving news deserts in communities around the nation. How did we get here and what is at stake? We have a great group of FIU experts today from the journalism, business, and political science fields who will weigh in on what the future holds for local journalism, how industry innovators are responding, and what it means for democracy and local communities. Joining me today to my immediate left is Mark Scheinbaum, adjunct professor, Department of Politics and International Relations with the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs. Next to him is Alan Richards, professor, Department of Journalism and Media, College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts. And next to him is Anthony Miyazaki, chair of the Department of Marketing and Logistics in the College of Business, all here at FIU. Thanks to all three of you for joining us here today. Mark, if I can, let me start with you. Let's just start with the basics of what was declared late last week by the McClatchy chain in saying that it was filing for bankruptcy. What does that mean?
Well, first, thanks for the forum today. I think it's an important issue. And this is the way in which McClatchy and 30-plus major newspapers, significant newspapers, can continue under the laws of bankruptcy, reorganization, sadly, usually also involving cutting back on payrolls, laying off employees. This is a tradition which has unhappily evolved over the last 20 years or so. But and when you listen to folks at the Miami Herald and some of the other newspapers, they're optimistic that quality alternatives, new aspects of digital delivery will bring them into the new era with social media. But I think for a personal comment, and I think my colleagues might agree, it's particularly sad because just 2 years ago, McClatchy was the subject of an award-winning movie, Shock and Awe, in which Joe Galloway, a great Vietnam War correspondent, put together a docudrama of how McClatchy was the only news organization to really investigate the war in Iraq. And that quality of journalism and information for the public is weakened every time we see this type of a bankruptcy going forward.
And Alan, if you can, maybe talk a little bit, we're here obviously in Miami, maybe talk a little bit about the Herald itself. It has done some amazing reporting and journalism, not least the situation of Jeffrey Epstein. If you could just give us a sense of the importance the Herald plays here in Miami.
Well, it's critical. It is a local paper, it's a regional paper, it's a national, and it's an international paper, or let's call it a media organization as well. You know, something like this I agree with Mark, and the threat here is what's happening too often when these situations arise, is that whether it's a hedge fund or a private equity company, they come in and they look to cost cut. And as Mark said, they start, layoffs, buyouts. They like the fact that media organizations are still profitable. And they like to cut back, and then they have the cash. But for an area, especially that's a bilingual area, and with so many people from so many, such a huge melting pot, this newspaper is an institution here and our journalism school has had a long historic relationship with them in terms of our students working there, our interns going there, and I have great memories of walking through the newsroom and seeing, having students wave, Professor Richards, or the interns waving, and then since 2008, this is not just a sudden ride now, but since 2008 and the scaling back of employees and great reporters. And to Mark's point, Julie K. Brown led the investigation with Jeffrey Epstein, and it's a fabulous job.
Yeah. So Anthony, given the importance the Herald plays here in Miami and beyond, what is the challenge papers like the Herald face when it comes to a business point of view?
Well, I think for all media organizations, the challenge right now is digital, and it's the challenge I think that was put in front of them 15 years ago even, and some responded quickly and some didn't respond. And I think what happened was that when you have a lot of the barriers to entry for digital are much lower. Someone can go onto YouTube and they can start a channel in essence and provide information. It may not be up-to-date news. It's not going to be award-winning news perhaps, but it's going to be something that people will consume. And always in marketing, we say that the organization either needs to change the product to fit the market, change the delivery, or change the market itself and change the people that are out there that are consuming. And I think now what's happened is that people have moved away from print, they've moved to digital, and to some degree they've moved a little bit away from local news and to national and something that's more exciting for them. And I think the challenge here then is, in any reorganization, is to go back in and focus on what does it mean, for example, for the Miami Herald and the Nuevo Herald, is to focus on what the local community needs and what they want that will bring them in and keep them coming back. And with that readership and the viewership will come the advertisers that will support that.
Yeah, I just want to add something.
Yeah.
I agree with you that national news has come in, and national has come in and has really distracted from the local in a big way, not in a small way. I think of a report from the Pew Research Center that says 71% of people in communities don't know that the local media is not financially stable. Mm-hmm. That's shocking. And so they're not, so what this says to me is that the community and the local newspaper that really is a binding agent is not really serving that. And so there is a lack of engagement in the community, a lack of and then the downward cycle because of that in terms of people become less engaged with their community. They don't have the news about their community. You see people getting less involved in elections, less candidates running for office. You see more partisan coverage. And so all that downward cycle really affects, or has a corrosive effect on democracy.
And to Alan's point, statistically, in off-year elections, we're finding registration down, and particularly in these news deserts. And I spent 11 years living in rural New Mexico. Mayoral races, county commission races, there's no one covering these things, school boards, boards of adjustment, Indian affairs, really significant environmental public hearings. Nothing is covered, and people are not motivated to come out and vote in local elections. So what's happening to the responsibility of elected officials to respond to public demand? The entire situation is critical.
So, you don't even have the reporters in the state houses. And so the job of journalists in terms of holding elected officials or appointed officials accountable, or our tax-funded institutions accountable. If we don't have coverage in state houses or in D.C. for national news, this is exactly what happens, what Mark says.
And Anthony, people are interested obviously in the weather. They're interested in the local sports team. But how do we get people interested in either newspaper or local TV stations coverage of the political situation, of what's happening in the community?
Well, I think that's the challenge I think that they have is that, and it's always been that journalism has been there, but I think the marketing side of it, and it's from our perspective in the business school, we always feel like we think that journalism should be journalism, and it shouldn't necessarily operate as a business, but in the end, you have to be funded somehow. And I think that Alan's talked before about ideas of funding that may not be necessarily only through advertising. But I think the key is to get people to understand that wherever they're living in that local community is their local community. And I think usually what happens is by the time they recognize that there's been a problem, it's too late to change that problem. Whereas if they had the news coverage there from the beginning, then they would have elected the right officials. They would have taken care of the issues before those issues occurred.
And Alan, there have been studies done about these news deserts that are out there and throughout the United States. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the impact those have, as you and Mark were just discussing, on engagement, on participation in political processes, whether it's local school boards or higher level positions?
65 million Americans live in an area that has either one or no local media organization. Think about that. Okay, so what are the implications of everything we just said? They're not getting the coverage. the local, what does a local media organization, journalism do for the community? As I said before, it holds people accountable. It holds our tax-funded institutions accountable. It provides information about health, education. It does investigative reporting. If this is not there, there is a loss of information, and that loss of information certainly is not productive in terms of participatory democracy.
And it provides a record beyond the cloud for future generations and for people today to challenge and to see what was said. I don't want to get a little bit poetic here, but I was in St. Augustine this weekend. My 6-year-old granddaughter stopped at a plaque, and with really good vocabulary for a 6-year-old, she read this story of Frederick Douglass speaking on this spot in St. Augustine. It was taken from the Florida Times-Union report of 1889. Who's going to be here to report the Board of Adjustment or problems with the environment or red tide or corruption in City Hall if we have no local reporters to document what happened at that moment?
And to Anthony's point before about social media, social media is information from anybody. These are not reports from professional journalism who are adhering to the tenets of journalism: accuracy, fairness.
There are no editors, no fact checkers.
Absolutely.
They're not, there's no standard to be held to because there
Right.
is no standard.
Exactly.
I think that's the issue there, and I think that's what the concern is that if you're getting your news from Twitter, you're getting your news really from other people that are out there and not necessarily from a news organization
Right.
that has
Wikipedia.
certain rules and regulations.
But how do these social media outlets that pop up, how do they sustain themselves? Or are we looking at some passing temporary phenomenon and it'll just come the next one? How do they, what marketing plan do they have in order to stay alive?
Well, I think their marketing plan is advertising dollars, and those advertising dollars are pouring in. And as long as those dollars come in, then they will continue to flourish and survive and thrive. And as long as those dollars are being transferred from the news or from the media organizations over to these other organizations, they become media organizations, but they're just not the official ones, and they're also not ones that have that same focus. The focus is to entertain
Exactly.
rather than to inform.
And this is why, depending on your market, you're going to find TMZ and Entertainment Tonight before or after the so-called straight news story, because the line between entertainment and hard news no longer exists. And I'm not saying that in a pejorative way. We don't control the rules, but when Kim Kardashian can pick up a phone and possibly get a prisoner released, and it's being covered by TMZ, and that's where our students are getting a lot of their news from, or on their phones, that's the reality of hard news coverage today, because it's bringing in advertising money for the sites that are disseminating the information.
And who is really dominating the digital advertising dollars is Google and is Facebook, and they bring in approximately 77% of the advertising dollars. So you take a look at a local journalism outlet which is being squeezed because they don't have they can't compete with Google and Facebook, and that's having a really big impact on them getting the advertising dollars. So that's part of what we're facing right now, that whole loss of advertising money, and you have these social media sites coming in and being able to do the business.
So Anthony, are there lessons to be learned, either good or bad, that the traditional media outlets might get from the newer social media sources?
They have to be in a place where the consumers want to consume that information, and so I think they've made that effort to go there, but I think the effort was made a little bit too late. I think the opportunity now is to kind of revamp in the perspective of, maybe, and not to say that we want to see the Herald or the Nuevo Herald go from daily to weekly, but there may be cuts that are made in the print side to support the digital side. And I think that's the key, is to look at those local audiences, get the local advertisers that are going to support them, and also even the national advertisers that want to reach our local market. The beautiful thing about Miami is that we do have a market, a big enough market that people will come here. It's not a small town somewhere, it's a big place. And I think also we have the advantage of having our English-speaking and our Spanish-speaking groups here that are big enough that can support that, and I think there's an opportunity there for the Miami Herald and the Nuevo Herald.
But let's take a look at an example of something that is working. that has figured out a model that is working. And the Texas Tribune has done a wonderful job. Texas Tribune was started 10 years ago as a startup. It is an online, nonprofit, nonpartisan publication, and they just had their 10th birthday in November. They've been in the black since 3 years in, since they started, and they have really been a great model of success that has helped diminish the news desert in Texas, because it is online, it is accessible in that sense. And if you speak to their CEO, Evan Smith, his statement is, well, one of the reasons we're successful is because people, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, will donate and will support us financially because we are nonpartisan. And the message he's saying is people are tired of the noise.
And what about things like ProPublica and other initiatives that are out there to try to keep this journalism alive?
It's essential, but it also is suspicious to a lot of people. Jeff Bezos can buy and sell all of McClatchy probably 9 times. So can Mr. Bloomberg. But when we have the mix of corporate interests and so-called philanthropic support of the news media, some people say, well, how do we know that the personal or political views of those who are giving the money is not impacting what's going on? Texas Tribune has solved the problem. They went from 10 employees to, I think, 70 full-time employees with fringe benefits. They came in with, what, $9.7 million last year with a $300,000 surplus, and one of the few newspapers and news organizations with a reporter and a bureau in Austin, in the state capital. But I think the foundations, whether it's the Knight Foundation or the Carnegie Foundation, this is not their first rodeo. 52 years ago, the New School for Social Research in New York said, wait a second, we don't see many women in the newsrooms. We don't see many black or Hispanic reporters anywhere in the United States, including New York City. And they started an urban minorities reporting certificate program for editors and reporters. And guess what? Maybe it wasn't the economic crisis we're talking about today, but this was a social crisis. This was a tremendous journalistic crisis, which was worked out with foundations and universities, and a change in the mindset of what is the reflection of the people reporting and editing the news vis-a-vis the population and the constituents of the newspaper. And private foundations and organizations help get this country through that area, through that crisis. And I think it can be done again.
Can you address what motivates a Jeff Bezos or Rupert Murdoch to buy the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal? Is it out of the goodness of their heart? Is this a business investment? And do we need more situations like that?
There's probably multiple reasons why. I mean, I would assume that part of it is a business venture, part of it is goodness of the heart, and part of it might be vanity. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of nice when you control all of this media, because then, you know, and I think there is that concern there that people have. And in fact, you listen to kids today and you ask them, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they say, I want to be an influencer, which is interesting because news reporters have been influencers for years, right? But this is a different thing where they feel like they can influence, but then the question is, well, what do you have to say? Is it just opinion, or is it a matter of you going out there and doing real, true, good journalism and finding out what's going on and then putting it together and telling that story?
But they may not be doing journalism. They most likely are not doing journalism as an influencer. Yeah, they can be just doing some entertainment or fashion or, yeah, and influencing at that level.
True.
No, but David's bringing an important issue. I think we can pound our own shoulders a little bit, but we're sitting at FIU with, I think, the second largest certified quality online teaching program in the United States of America. And when we talk about the people who gave of themselves, was it for their ego or was it for journalism? I believe when Gannett decided, hey, Vanderbilt University needs a First Amendment forum. They need a center for civil rights and First Amendment. We need a museum, which is now gone, ill-fated. But when someone writes a check for $750 million for First Amendment and press freedom, I don't think they were looking for bottom line that week. There may have been estate and tax reasons for it, But the university setting, whether it's FIU or Vanderbilt, has become a catalyst for solving these problems. And you were saying to us earlier that enrollment is up,
Yeah.
and the motivation of students to study journalism is up.
Yeah, talk to that, Alan, about what you're seeing in the College of Communications.
Well, let me jump off your point here about the collaboration. The hallmark of this era, of this digital era, has been disruption. The other hallmark of this era has been innovation and collaboration. And so to your point, academia and industry have, and the foundations, have in the past collaborated to try to solve these problems. And this is ongoing right now. And it has been going, and certainly in the Department of Journalism, for almost 20 years that this is ongoing, where we have had a historic relationship with the Miami Herald, as I said, but we've also worked very closely with Scripps Howard, the Hearst Foundation, McCormick Foundation, trying to solve problems, creating projects, creating programs. In 2008, when that really big recession hit, and the editors of the Herald and the Sun Sentinel and the Palm Beach Post, I was associate dean of the school at the time, came to us and said, listen, we need help. And what they meant by help is, look, we've lost a lot of reporters. We're not asking you to try to replace them, but it's an opportunity for student journalists to cover stories in underreported areas that we're going to lose. So that's what we did. We did that. We raised $500,000, and we had the South Florida News Service for about 9 or 10 years. And now, when we consolidated with Carta, Dean Schreiner, God bless him, built us a media hub and a newsroom, and we started something called the South Florida Media Network, which continues the immersive hands-on learning approach to journalism. And this is happening all over the country. We've been a pioneer at it here at FIU, but student journalists are helping local journalism outlets report the news. And we continue to do that. In fact, the South Florida Media Network was established as its own media organization. We have hired the former editor of the New Times, Chuck Strauss, as the director. We have a former editor from the LA Times working with him in our faculty. And the students are on fire.
And talk a little bit about some of the students that have come and gone here, graduated from FIU, and are now, where are they now?
They're all over the place. One of my favorite former students is the NPR foreign correspondent, Ada Peralta. He's a foreign correspondent in East Africa. He covers East Africa. Jose Pagliari was at CNN Money, and he's now at Univision in New York. Elias Gonzalez-Lopez actually started the New York Times. He was the director of the New York Times in Espanol, based in Mexico City. He's now at the Washington Post. He's an opinion editor there. So Erica Maldonado is an anchor for Univision in Chicago. Pamela Silva Conde.
A long list.
Yeah, it goes on.
Terrific.
They've done really well, both in English and both in Spanish. And we're continuing like that. And the students, as I just said a sec, they are so excited. And this media organization, these aren't even students who are in our curriculum. They want to be involved in journalism, whether it's digital, broadcast, or print.
And Anthony, from a business school perspective, what skills do you think sort of new aspiring journalists need to have in order to survive financially in this environment?
Well, I think that the idea here really is this passion, the idea of saying, I want to be someone who's going to work and do actually investigative journalism or do something where you're trying to truly be a journalist rather than someone who's going to go out there and just try to make money. And I think that, I'm not going to say it's a calling necessarily, but I do think that there's a lot of time and effort that goes into building that career. And it takes a while to build that career, but then those who do that, I think, get a lot out of it. And I think that's the key to doing that versus someone who's going to look for the quick buck. I don't think there's quick bucks in journalism, unfortunately, but I think there's a lot of reward that comes from that, and I think there's a lot of reward that comes from trying to build something where you're having, you're providing a service and providing information to people that is unbiased, that is out there, that's going to help them make decisions better.
Journalists are educators, in a sense. Mm-hmm. They provide us with information, the truth. They provide us with the truth, and that is an enormous commodity. What I really resent about these hedge funds and private equities coming in, journalism is a public good. It's not a pair of sneakers, and they treat it like that kind of commodity, and that is you know, you can sense how I feel about that, and any journalist feels about that, anybody who's educating. Journalists provide information, the truth, so that we can use the truth to make informed decisions.
And Mark, there is another challenge, which is a lot of people tend to go to the newspapers or stations or outlets that they think will reinforce their views already. How do we deal with that challenge so that we try to broaden people's horizons?
It's tough love. And we can point the finger at zero tolerance. We can no longer get online and be frustrated at the airport and say, oh my, I mean, if I have to wait one more minute, I'm going to blow this place up. You say that, you're gone. We have zero tolerance for sexual harassment, for anti-terrorism. Where's the zero tolerance for journalistic ignorance? You know, where are the grandparents and the parents who are saying, no, what happened today? If you're not watching the news, you need to give me a summary of what's going on. It's not just the high school football games, which are good. It's good to get the news on that. But isn't there a responsibility, K-12, and also with parents and grandparents and peer pressure, to reinstill a feeling that it's cool to know stuff, it's cool to win trivia contests, and it's cool to really have an idea of what's happening and not just clicking and forwarding conspiracy theories and falsehoods to all your friends and say, oops, I was sorry, he's still alive, I didn't know he wasn't dead. There is a responsible element here, and it's almost as if we have to instill a new feeling that becoming part of the attentive public, as sociologists call it, is a good thing to be. To watch evening news, to read newspapers online, to go to a website such as the Texas Tribune. And it's way above my pay grade to know how we solve this problem. But I think it starts in the home and in the schools.
You know, I'm reminded, I wrote it down here, Thomas Jefferson's quote, were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. But then he does go on to say, and this is, I think, always gets dropped, but I should mean that every man should receive those papers and be capable of reading them. In other words, has a responsibility to know what's going on. And this gets at the point, I think, you were making, the importance of getting at the truth and having journalists be educators to inform the general public of what is going on. So I think we are running out of time. Last thought, though, if I can, just in terms of a message for the students who are studying journalism here. Alan, what would you tell them?
Keep at it. Keep at it. I mean, there's so much is riding on what we've all been talking about in terms of providing accurate, fair information. And journalism, as I said, is a public service. And we need it if our democracy is really going to thrive.
And Mark, to your students and others out there.
I would say interdisciplinary studies, these are your friends. Utilize the global learning initiatives we have here at our university and many other universities. If you're passionate about sports, you better learn something about physiotherapy or sports management. If you're concerned about the environment and pollution, how about rooting some of your academic training in the physical sciences as well? And I think Alan will agree. The idea of some kind of a broad macro journalism background is not going to get you hired.
Anthony?
I'll tell you what, I think from the marketing side, I think the marketers have to, I mean, marketers don't just market the shoes and the soap and everything else, but they also market ideas. And I think the idea to be marketed here is the idea that getting your news from a source that is reliable, rather than just getting your news from someone who just happened to mention it on their channel, their personal channel, makes all the difference. And I think that's the key. So I think from the marketing side, we have to make sure that message gets across.
Go ahead.
New York Times did a great campaign a few years ago called Truth is Hard. Mm-hmm. They ran it to counter misinformation. They also ran it to get digital ads as well, and they did get digital ads. But that was a fantastic campaign. And
the Post had one, Democracy Dies in Darkness, as well. So critical reminders, I think, of the vital role that journalism plays in our society and our democracy. Anthony Miyazaki, Alan Richards, Mark Scheinbaum, thanks very much to all three of you for joining us. This brings us to a close here with FIU Insights. I'm David Kramer. Thanks very much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next time.